I'm the kind of guy who doesn't say much but builds a solid life in quiet ways. At 38, I've learned that actions matter more than words, that consistency trumps grand gestures, and that the best relationships, like the best engineering projects, are built on foundations you can trust completely. Claire and I met at my buddy Marcus's birthday weekend at his lake house. I was nursing a beer on the dock, watching the sunset paint the water gold, when she appeared beside me with that laugh that could light up a room. She had this way of making conversation feel effortless, like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. While everyone else was getting loud around the fire pit, we talked about everything and nothing. Her work as a graphic designer, my latest project at the engineering firm, the way the stars looked different away from the city. "You're not much of a party person, are you?" she asked, settling into the chair beside mine. "Depends on the party," I said. "This is perfect." And it was. She got that immediately. Where other women had tried to drag me into crowds or complained about my quiet nature, Claire seemed to appreciate the space between words, the comfort of just being present with someone without needing to fill every silence. We fell hard and fast after that weekend. She'd drive over to my apartment after work, and we'd cook dinner together, her chattering about difficult clients while I listened and stirred pasta sauce. She made everything feel warmer somehow. My sterile bachelor pad transformed when she started leaving books on my coffee table, her favorite tea in my cupboard, her laugh echoing off walls that had been too quiet for too long. The proposal came 2 years later, on another dock at another lake during another sunset. I'd had the ring for months, waiting for the right moment, but when she looked at me with that same expression she'd worn that first night, like I was exactly what she'd been looking for without knowing it, the words just came naturally. "Marry me," I said, and she said yes before I even got the ring out of my pocket. Our wedding was small, perfect. Claire in a simple dress that made her look like she was glowing from the inside out. Me in the suit my father had worn to his own wedding 40 years earlier. We wrote our own vows, standing under an arch her best friend had decorated with flowers from her garden. I promised to be her steady ground, her safe harbor, the person she could always count on. She promised to be my light, my laughter, the voice that would call me home. The early years of marriage felt like proof that I'd gotten the most important equation of my life exactly right. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers spread across our bed, her feet tucked under my legs while she worked on freelance projects, and I sketched out solutions to problems from the office. Road trips where we'd compile playlists together, her pop songs mixed with my classic rock, arguing good-naturedly about whether the Beatles were better than the Stones while miles of highway disappeared beneath us. We bought the house on Maple Street because Claire fell in love with the kitchen windows that looked out onto the backyard where she imagined planting a garden. I fell in love with the garage that could fit my workbench and her car, with the solid bones of a place built to last. We spent weekends at Home Depot, picking out paint colors and cabinet hardware, her eyes bright with plans for our future. "We're good at this," she said one evening, both of us paint-splattered and exhausted after finishing the living room. She was curled against my side on our plastic-covered couch, surveying our work with satisfaction. "We are," I agreed, kissing the top of her head. "We build good things together." And we did. 5 years of marriage that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Dinner parties where Claire's warmth drew people in and my steady presence made them feel comfortable staying. Holidays with both our families, Claire mediating between my reserved parents and her dramatic ones with the grace of a diplomat. Quiet evenings where she'd read on the couch with her feet in my lap while I worked on hobby projects at the coffee table. I trusted it completely, trusted her completely, because that's how I approach everything in life. When I commit to something, whether it's a career or a construction project or a marriage, I give it everything I have. I believed Claire was the same way. I believed we'd built something that could weather any storm, something with the structural integrity to last a lifetime. The foundation felt solid, The framework seemed sound. All the load-bearing elements were exactly where they should be. I'd checked and double-checked every joint, every connection, every point of potential failure. I never imagined that the most dangerous flaw would be something I couldn't engineer away, something that had been hidden in the blueprints from the very beginning. The simple, devastating possibility that the person I'd built everything with might decide, one ordinary Tuesday evening, that she wanted to tear it all down and start over with someone else. I came home from work that Tuesday expecting nothing more complicated than leftover lasagna and maybe catching the game on TV. The project at work had run long, structural calculations for a new bridge downtown that kept refusing to balance properly, and my brain was still half lost in load distributions and stress analyses when I walked through the front door. Claire was in the kitchen, but something felt off immediately. She wasn't humming like she usually did while cooking, wasn't dancing slightly to whatever playlist she had going. Instead, she stood with her back to me, shoulders rigid, staring out the window at the garden she'd never quite gotten around to planting. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "Good day?" She turned around, and I saw it in her face. That look people get when they're about to deliver bad news. In my line of work, I'd seen it plenty of times right before clients told me the budget had been cut, or the timeline moved up, or the whole project was being scrapped. But this was Claire, and we were in our kitchen, and there was no reason for that expression to be aimed at me. "We need to talk," she said, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor. In 7 years together, Claire had never used those words. We talked constantly, about everything, but she'd never made it sound like a formal proceeding. She gestured toward the living room, and I followed her, my mind already running through possibilities like checking calculations. Money problems, family drama, health issues. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, not close like we usually did, not with her feet tucked under my legs or my arm around her shoulders. She perched on the edge of the cushions like she might need to run, her hands twisted together in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, and I waited for the rest, but she seemed stuck on those words. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and she kept looking at me and then away, like she couldn't quite face whatever she was about to say. "Thinking about what?" I asked, though some part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. "About us. About our marriage." She took a shaky breath. "Ethan, I love you. I need you to know that before I say anything else. But I feel like we're broken somehow. Like we've gotten so comfortable that we've forgotten how to really see each other." The words hit me like a structural failure under load. Sudden, catastrophic, impossible to fix once it started. But I kept my voice level, my face calm. "What do you mean, broken?" "We're like roommates," she said, gaining momentum now that she'd started. "We have our routines, our comfortable patterns, but when was the last time you really looked at me? When was the last time we talked about anything that mattered? Anything beyond what we're having for dinner or whether we need to call the plumber?" I thought about that morning, how she'd kissed my cheek while I drank coffee and read the news, how natural and right it had felt. "I thought we were happy," I said. "So did I for a long time. But lately—" She was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks while she struggled to find words. "I keep wondering if this is all there is. If I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this same routine, with this same comfortable distance between us, never feeling that spark again, never feeling truly seen or desired or passionate about anything." "Are you having an affair?" The question came out harder than I intended, cutting through her rambling explanation. "No," she said quickly. "No, I haven't cheated. I would never do that to you, to us. But—" She looked up at me with something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. "I've been thinking that maybe we should try being apart for a while. Maybe we need some space to figure out if what we have is worth fighting for, or if we're just staying together because it's easier than admitting we've grown apart." The words kept coming after that, but I stopped hearing them clearly. Something about counseling, about taking time to explore what she might be missing, about being too young to settle for comfortable but passionless. She talked about reconnecting, about rediscovering herself as an individual, about the possibility of coming back together stronger. But all I heard was that my wife wanted to explore other options, that she thought what we'd built together wasn't enough, that she wanted to shop around and see if she could do better. "I don't want to lose you," she was saying when I tuned back in. "But I feel like I'm losing myself, and I don't know how to fix that without some space to breathe and think and—" "Stop," I said quietly, and she did, looking at me with those wide, hopeful eyes like I might have a solution that would make this easier for both of us. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the yard where she'd imagined planting flowers but never quite gotten around to it. My mind felt strangely clear. "You want space?" I said without turning around. "Yes, but—" she stammered. "You want to explore other options?" I said. "Not other people necessarily, just other possibilities, other ways of being." I turned back to face her. She was watching me with growing uncertainty, like she was starting to realize this conversation wasn't going the way she'd expected. "You have 1 hour," I said. "What?" she asked. "Pack your things, whatever you need for the next few weeks. You can come back for the rest later." My voice sounded perfectly calm to my own ears, professionally detached. "I'll drive you to your parents' house." "Ethan, no, that's not what I meant," she stammered. "It's exactly what you meant." I checked my watch. 58 minutes now." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "I wanted to talk about this. I wanted us to work through it together, maybe try counseling first." "Claire." I looked at her directly, and she must have seen something in my expression that made her stop talking. "You just told me you want to explore whether our marriage is worth keeping. You don't ask someone to wait around while you shop for alternatives. Pack your things." "You're being ridiculous. This is exactly the kind of communication problem I'm talking about. You're not even trying to understand." "I understand perfectly." I sat back down, but not close to her. "You're not happy. You think something better might be out there. You want to find out without losing your safety net. And you expected me to sit here and negotiate with you about it." "Yes, I expected you to care enough to fight for us," she said. "I don't fight for people who are already halfway out the door." I stood up again. 55 minutes. The panic in her eyes was real, and part of me wanted to comfort her, to take back the words and pretend this conversation had never happened. But a larger part of me, the part that had spent 20 years learning that structural integrity was everything, knew that some cracks couldn't be repaired. Some foundations, once damaged, would never be truly solid again. She packed in 37 minutes, moving through the house like she was in shock, throwing clothes and toiletries into 2 suitcases while I waited by the front door. She kept trying to start conversations, explanations, apologies, attempts to reframe what she'd said, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to discuss. The drive to her parents' house was silent except for her crying. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road, my mind carefully blank. When I pulled into their driveway, she turned to me one last time. "This isn't what I wanted," she whispered. "It's exactly what you wanted," I said. "You just thought it would cost less." I helped her carry her bags to the door, waited until her mother answered and pulled her inside with concerned questions, then drove home to our empty house and began the methodical process of moving forward without her. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed with another text from Claire. I glanced at it while reviewing blueprints at my desk, then set the phone aside without reading the full message. I'd caught enough to know it was another variation on the same theme: regret, explanation, a plea for conversation. The divorce papers had been filed 2 days after I dropped her at her parents' house. My lawyer, Jim Patterson, had handled my real estate transactions and knew me well enough not to ask too many questions when I called him that Wednesday morning. "You sure about this, Ethan?" he'd asked. "No kids? Minimal assets to divide, clean break, but once we file, it gets complicated to undo. File it, I'd said, and he had. Since then, Claire had launched what could only be described as a campaign. Texts at all hours, voicemails that started apologetic and grew increasingly desperate, long emails explaining what she'd really meant, how I'd misunderstood, how she'd just been going through a phase and never intended for us to actually separate. She'd apparently told her parents and friends some version of events that made me look like the unreasonable one, because I'd fielded calls from her mother and sister, and at least 3 mutual friends asking if we could work things out. I'd been polite but clear with all of them. Claire had asked for space to explore other options, and I'd given her exactly what she requested. If she was unhappy with the arrangement, that was between her and her own choices. The most awkward conversation had been with Marcus, whose birthday party had introduced us in the first place. He'd shown up at my apartment on a Saturday morning with coffee and the kind of concerned expression usually reserved for interventions. Claire called Sarah crying, he said, settling into my kitchen chair like he planned to stay a while. Says you won't return her calls, won't consider counseling, just served her with papers like she was some stranger. She's not a stranger, I said, pouring my own coffee. She's the woman who told me our marriage wasn't enough for her and she needed to explore other possibilities. That's not how she tells it. I'm sure it's not. I leaned against the counter, studying my oldest friend. Marcus, what would you do if Sarah came home one day and said she wasn't sure your marriage was worth keeping, wanted some space to figure out if she could do better? He was quiet for a long minute. I'd probably lose my shit completely. I didn't lose my shit. I listened to what she said and responded accordingly. I sipped my coffee, found it bitter but drank it anyway. She wanted to explore other options. I'm letting her explore. She's miserable, man. Whatever she thought she wanted, she doesn't want it now. Then she's learning something valuable about herself. Marcus left after an hour, shaking his head like I was making a mistake he couldn't quite identify. But I saw understanding in his eyes, too. The recognition that what Claire had asked for wasn't really negotiable. You can't unring that bell. You can't ask your spouse to wait patiently while you figure out whether they're good enough to keep. The social fallout was manageable but persistent. Dinner invitations that had included both of us suddenly became awkward. Friends who didn't know whose side to take. The assumption that I must be devastated, that I was putting on a brave front while secretly hoping for reconciliation. The truth was simpler and more complicated than that. I wasn't secretly devastated. I was methodically rebuilding, the same way I'd approach any other major structural project. Step 1, assess the damage. Step 2, salvage whatever could be saved. Step 3, clear the foundation and start fresh. The house felt different without Claire's presence, but not empty. Quieter, yes, but not lonely. I established new routines, claimed spaces that had been hers, rearranged furniture to suit my preferences instead of our compromises. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals became my workspace for evening projects. The bedroom we'd shared became simply my bedroom, the bed made according to my standards, the closet reorganized to accommodate only my clothes. I was eating dinner at that table, take-out Thai food and engineering journals, when I saw her through the front window. Claire was sitting in her car across the street, just sitting there in the growing dusk, staring at the house. I watched her for 10 minutes, neither of us moving, then got up and closed the blinds. The next morning, there were flowers on my front porch, white roses with a card in her handwriting. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please call me. I love you. I put the flowers in the trash can without bringing them inside. 2 days later, I was coming out of the grocery store when I saw her again, this time walking across the parking lot with someone I didn't recognize. A tall guy with carefully styled hair and expensive-looking clothes, the kind of man who probably used more hair products than most women. They were laughing about something, her head thrown back in that way I remembered, her hand briefly touching his arm. I finished loading my groceries, drove home, and realized I felt nothing stronger than mild curiosity. She was doing exactly what she'd said she wanted to do, exploring other options. The fact that she was apparently doing it while simultaneously begging me to take her back only confirmed that I'd made the right choice. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October, exactly 6 months after that conversation in our living room. Jim called me at work to let me know the judge had signed the papers, that it was officially over. Claire hadn't contested anything. The house, the savings account, the division of assets. She'd signed everything her lawyer put in front of her like she was still hoping cooperation might earn her a second chance. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and toasted the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Not in celebration, not in bitterness, but in recognition of a task completed efficiently and thoroughly. I was free to build something new, and this time I'd be more careful about checking the foundation. The first year after the divorce, I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone was coming home to a quiet house and choosing how to spend my evening without negotiating or compromising. Alone was discovering I actually enjoyed cooking when I only had to please myself, that I could spend entire weekends working on projects without interruption, that silence could be peaceful rather than awkward. Lonely was something I'd expected but rarely felt. Maybe because I'd chosen this solitude rather than having it forced on me. Maybe because I'd learned to see Claire's absence not as something missing, but as space for something better to grow. About 10 months after the papers were signed, I started dating again, not actively seeking anyone, but open to possibilities when they presented themselves. I met Lisa at a professional conference, an architect who'd consulted on one of my projects. She was smart, independent, knew what she wanted, and seemed to appreciate the same qualities in me. We started with coffee meetings that turned into dinner dates, taking things slowly but steadily. I ran into Claire at the coffee shop on 5th Street about 14 months after the divorce was final. She was sitting alone at a corner table, looking tired in a way that makeup couldn't quite hide. When she saw me in line, her face went through several expressions before settling on something that might have been hope. "Ethan," she said as I passed her table with my order. "Claire." I paused, studying her face. She looked older somehow, or maybe just worn down. "How are you?" She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Can you sit for a minute?" "Please." I had nowhere pressing to be, so I sat. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth, even though it was a mild spring day. "I heard you're seeing someone," she said after a moment. Word traveled fast in our circle. Lisa and I had been together for 4 months now, taking things slowly but steadily. She understood about foundations, about building things that last, about the difference between settling and choosing wisely. "I am," I said simply. Claire nodded like she'd been expecting that answer. "Is it serious?" "Could be." I watched her face carefully. "Why?" She looked down at her coffee, then back at me. "I miss you. I miss us. I know I screwed everything up. I know you probably hate me. But I had to try one more time. What I did, what I said that night, it wasn't really about you or about us. I was just, I don't know. Scared of getting older, scared of settling, scared of missing out on something. But I was wrong about all of it. What do you want from me, Claire? I want to know if there's any chance, any possibility that we could try again. I've had over a year to figure out what I really want, and it's you. It was always you." I sipped my coffee, considered her words, felt the familiar absence of the anger or hurt she probably expected to find. "How did the exploring go?" I asked. Her cheeks flushed. "It was a mistake, all of it. I thought I wanted excitement, passion, the kind of romance you see in movies. But that's not real life, is it? Real life is what we had. Trust, stability, someone who shows up every day. And you figured that out by dating other people. Yes. She met my eyes directly. I had to lose it to understand what it was worth. I nodded slowly. The thing is, Claire, I didn't have to lose it to know what it was worth. I knew exactly what we had, and I was committed to keeping it. You're the one who decided it wasn't enough. I know. I was an idiot. You weren't an idiot. You were honest about what you wanted, and I gave you exactly that. I finished my coffee, set the cup down. You wanted to explore other options, so I freed you up to explore. You wanted space to figure things out, so I gave you all the space you could possibly need. You wanted to know if you could do better than what we had, and now you do. And I can't, she said quietly. I can't do better than what we had. Maybe not, but I can. The words hung between us for a moment. She looked like I'd slapped her, and I realized she'd come here expecting a different conversation entirely. She'd expected me to be wounded, waiting, grateful for her return. What does that mean? She asked. It means I've learned some things this past year, too. I've learned that I deserve someone who doesn't need to shop around to figure out that I'm worth keeping. I've learned that the kind of love I want to build my life on doesn't come with escape clauses and trial separations. I stood up, looked down at the woman I'd once planned to spend my life with. She was beautiful still, familiar in ways that tugged at old habits of affection. But she was also a reminder of the most important lesson I'd learned in 39 years. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go find what they're looking for, even if it means they might find out it wasn't you. I hope you find what you're looking for, Claire. I really do. But it's not going to be with me. I left her sitting there and drove home to the house that was completely mine now, where Lisa would be coming for dinner that evening, where we'd cook together without the weight of old disappointments, where we'd build something new on ground I'd cleared completely. 6 months later, I proposed to Lisa on my back deck, the one Claire had never gotten around to helping me finish. Lisa said yes without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for the question as long as I'd been waiting to ask it. We're planning a wedding for next fall. Lisa understands about foundations, about building things that last, about showing up every day ready to invest in what you've chosen to build together. She's never asked me to compete for her attention or prove my worth through grand gestures. She shows up every day the same way I do, ready to build something together that neither of us wants to walk away from. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled that night with Claire differently, if I'd fought harder, or agreed to counseling, or tried to win her back. But those wonderings never last long. I gave Claire exactly what she asked for, and in doing so, I gave myself the chance to find someone who would never ask for it in the first place. That's not revenge. It's just the natural consequence of building your life on solid ground and refusing to settle for anything less than someone who's grateful to be there with you. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.